Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, a Bet the Board production. And then there were two races remaining in the marathon that is the NASCAR Cup Series. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by professional NASCAR bettor, my racing colleague on this very fine program, Chris Werme. And Wormser, you told us Homestead was one of your favorite tracks to bet, but the racing and gambling gods did not smile kindly upon us with ill-timed cautions, and go figure, it's our beloved 5-car wreaking havoc on our wagering weekend.
I mean, what are we calling this? Is this like Larson Gate, Sand Gate, Barrel Gate? Like we had the Hail Melon. Was this the Hail Larson? Like,
I don't even know what Kyle's looking to accomplish there. It's not like, well, I guess it helped William Byron, whose point lead is not insurmountable, but he's in pretty good shape. But trying to do everything he can to maybe keep Ryan Blaney out of the mix, knowing that Blaney was going to pose one of the greatest threats to him. Should he make the Final Four at Phoenix?
Well, if you go back and listen to the interview, he thought whoever won that race off pit road was going to win the race. That's how good Ryan Blaney was last week. So credit to that 12 team for putting a lot of pressure on Kyle Larson at Homestead. And, hats off to Blaney for just being that good against the wall with Larson running him down. It was, that 12 car, just hats off to that team. They had a great setup, and he was the only other driver I thought that could compete with Larson. Unfortunately, Larson agreed and thought that he had to pass him on the entrance to pit road. And I don't know, that whole thing was just weird. It was a weird race out of the 5.
Yeah, I mean, the 12 team, to your point, unloaded fast. It has 20-1, 25-1 shot. Was great on the long runs, just wasn't able to put it all together for a complete race. For those folks who may have stumbled on the Stay Green podcast for the first time this season, we break things up into 3 very distinct stages. Stage 1, all about what we learned and what we might be able to apply going forward, albeit with a very limited sample size, knowing that was the last 1.5 mile track we completed at Homestead. Stage 2 during the postseason is all about a playoff reset with 2 drivers punching their ticket to Phoenix, 6 drivers, if I could do math in my head, still vying for 2 more available spots. And then, of course, in stage 3, it's all about the drivers to watch. So when we look at stage 1, Chris, and we try and figure out what some of our biggest takeaways were, I guess I'll give you a real open-ended question here. What was one of your biggest surprises and biggest disappointments for what you saw go down at the 1.5 mile high tire wear track in South Florida?
Well, the one thing about Homestead is it's really hard to have a different strategy, right? You run more than 2 or 3 laps, you're going to come down and you're going to take your tires. But there is strategy when it comes to green flag pit stops. We saw a lot of 80 lap runs to the end of a stage, and we saw a couple different strategies. The first one was after 30 laps of a run, you put on new tires, and then you have a 50 lap run to the finish. You saw a couple teams, I think it was mainly Joe Gibbs Racing and Denny Hamlin and Chris Bell, that were just splitting the stage right down the middle. What that did was allow for there to be a 10-lap buffer period where if a caution fell, those drivers that stayed out would inherit track position. We see it all the time. You see it at places like Richmond, or Darlington, where people try to short pit, is what they say. And very rarely does a caution fall in that time period. Well, that happened this week. And when that happens, the field flips. And when there's no rhyme or reason to it, it's just during green flag stops, Kyle Larson had an issue getting onto pit road for whatever reason. And there were cars that had already pitted. And once that happens, those drivers are in big trouble because they're going to end up a lap down and have to take the wave around. The problem with the wave around is you have to go behind lap down cars. So not only are you starting, like you're
Which
just
I still have
tail
never
end.
figured out. When we talk about competitive balance in NASCAR, that's one rule that I will never understand. That if you're a lap down, you should start at the tail end of the field, not, wherever you may be going, oh, I'm a lap down, but I'm going to restart sixth. Like,
Yeah, you're going to
no one has been able to explain
I
that
agree.
to me in any capacity.
That makes it really difficult. So this entire race with 51 laps to go, when this caution came out, all of our bets were looking swimmingly. And, but that just goes to show you that there's still strategy, even if there's not a lot of cautions. Now, there's a different type of strategy that's going to happen at Martinsville, whether it's 2 tires or 4 tires when you're pitting. But right now, because it's so difficult to pass at even a place like Homestead, where there's multiple grooves and it's one of the easier, in quotes, tracks to pass, you weren't able to see passing. And so strategy is just so important at this point in the season. In another thing, if you go back and watch this race from the spring, during green flag pit stops, that's when there was a caution. And that's what kind of turned this race on its head and allowed for a guy like Kyle Larson, who was probably a 4th or 5th place car, win the race. So we could see the same thing happen in this race. However, there's, playoff implications at stake. So it's a way bigger, speed bump along the way to make sure that you don't get caught on the wrong side of a caution with your current strategy or the strategy that you think gives you the best opportunity to either win the race or make the playoffs.
Well, and you mentioned this race, and being a shitty host that I am, failed to introduce that we're going to Martinsville this weekend, one of the shortest tracks in the Cup Series circuit. So before we hit the rewind button and talk about what we looked at Homestead, we'll, of course, get to Martinsville in greater detail later. And also buried the lead, Christopher Bell finds his way to victory lane, grabs his 2nd win of the season, rallied from what I guess would best be described as a frustrating race to lead the final 16 laps, makes his first appearance inside the top 5 with less than 50 laps remaining, and pretty much NASCAR in a nutshell. You don't have to be good at the beginning of the race. You don't have to be good at the middle of the race. You just have to be good when it matters the most. Congrats to Christopher Bell, one of 2 cars that knows he will be racing a week from Sunday for a series championship. However, for 2 of his JGR teammates, the day did not go nearly as smoothly. Martin Truex Jr. and Denny Hamlin find themselves on the wrong side of the cut line. More on that in a bit. You already touched on Ryan Blaney. So before we put an official bow on some of the things that we saw transpire for stage 1, what were your biggest takeaways with JGR as a race team in general? Ty Gibbs also quietly slots 7th, the 2nd best finish amongst that stable of drivers.
Yeah, a rough day for JGR. Just, I guess you could say that for not a rough day, like a feast or famine type day, where you have Chris Bell that at a certain point in the race Adam Stevens comes on and says, this is actually kind of funny to Chris Bell because he's pretty calm on the radio for the most part. Adam Stevens, his crew chief, comes on and says, hey, you need to pick it up. We need you to stay on the lead lap. And Chris Bell's response was, oh, really? Okay, I'll start really trying now. like he hasn't been trying to stay on the lead lap. That's how dire this situation was for this 20 team. Fast forward 100 laps and this guy's vying for a victory. But I was shocked about the 11 and the 19, both of them, 19 with an engine failure, which is always something that can typically become contagious on teams. It happened late enough in the race where I don't think that there were other Toyotas that were going to be nervous. In the 11, he claims that something just randomly broke, but I still think that the way he was racing Ryan Blaney, I think he put the car in a situation where something was going to give. And that's what I think happened. But I know that Denny would never admit to that. But I'll tell you what, I was, when they were racing like that, obviously as someone who was backing Blaney, I was screaming at Denny Hamlin. I was not happy with the way he was racing our guy. And to see him hit the wall, I think I cheered. I think I said he deserved it. But that was a very interesting day for the 1911 that I did not think were as good as, the 5 or the 12. But I certainly did not think that Bell had a race-winning car until, he just inherits a 5th place spot, gets aggressive on a restart, takes advantage of the Denny and Ryan Blaney racing themselves like absolute dickheads, and he was able to just pull away and win the race.
Incredible, because when we went through some of our pre-race stuff, I said Bell was a car I thought was going to offer all sorts of opportunity to bet against. We, of course, did so with Ross Chastain, lay $1.20, get the good old CLV that ends up in the trash can with that matchup closing minus $1.50, and they're only separated by around 30 positions when that race came to an end. 'Tis the life of betting NASCAR as we wave the green-white checkered flag on stage 1 and we focus our attention on stage 2. Want to encourage all of you guys and girls to follow Chris on X at Chris Werme15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And when we look at stage 2, Worm, we'll do a reset like we've done every race so far this playoffs and look at some of the odds to win the championship. Kyle Larson clinched. His number remains right around 3-2, depending on where you look. Christopher Bell also clinched 7-2, the going rate for him, which is interesting because I do think Bell's price could drift out depending on who the other two drivers that'll join them there. So I'm not sure I'd be running it back him. And when we look at the other 6 drivers fighting for 2 spots, it's William Byron at a very short price of plus 275. He's got the luxury of a 30-point cushion to the cut line. Ryan Blaney, 10 points clear. He's priced at 14-1, a legitimate threat should he get to Phoenix, in my estimation. Yes. Tyler Reddick, 10 points below. He's at 40-1. The pair of aforementioned JGR drivers, both 17 points to the bad. Martin Truex Jr., 20-1. Denny Hamlin at 10-1. And if you believe in Cinderella stories like we got last year from Christopher Bell, finding a way in a victory lane at Martinsville, Chris Buescher's your guy, 43 points short. It's win or go home, 100-1 the going rate. And Worm, we've made a case for Tyler Reddick seemingly every race. We said his best opportunity to get to Phoenix was going to be a win at either Vegas or Homestead. There's a reason he's at 40-1 right now. For me, I don't see necessarily a path unless things get completely chaotic. Maybe he can race his way in if Bell has problems, Martin Truex Jr., Denny Hamlin do something stupid. But to ask him to win the race feels like a little bit of a daunting proposition. But in terms of some of the other drivers, is there anyone that catches your eye? Would you be interested in William Byron at plus 275? Or is this the odds maker's way of saying, look, he's going to be at a very similar price when we go to Phoenix, although I honestly would price him more in that 2-1 plus 225 range if he's one of the 4 guys actually into the championship.
Yeah, I would say him and Byron will be the favorites, or Larson and Byron will be the favorites, heading into Phoenix. I'm assuming that William Byron's just going to run a clean race. If I'm that 24 team, it's 4 tires and fuel on every stop. It scores some stage points and just avoid a mistake. If there's green flag pit stops, I am on that radio, do not speed, because I think that's the only thing that really keeps William Byron out of this Final Four. So this 275 price is not a terrible price. If I think that he'll be right around that 2-1 price. I think you have that kind of nailed. Him and Larson will be right around 2-1 to win the championship. Where I do find a little bit of value is a guy like Martin Truex Jr. They're making a massive assumption here with this price when it comes to Denny Hamlin. Listen, Denny Hamlin is really good at Martinsville, but you'd be making a mistake if you thought that Martin Truex Jr. wasn't also good at Martinsville. 3 of the last 7 races there, he's won. And the biggest thing between Truex and Hamlin, they're both 17 points outside the cut line. Yes, I would give a slight edge to Denny Hamlin here this week. Obviously, odds dictate that with a 3-1 opening price, whereas Truex opened at 12, now down to 10. But when it goes to Phoenix, Truex is way better than Denny Hamlin at Phoenix. So I think that if you're Kyle Larson or Chris Bell, you'd rather have Denny Hamlin in the Final Four than you would Martin Truex Jr. So I think that's where the best value lies, is in that Martin Truex Jr. at 20-1 price. Tyler Reddick, he's going to need to have some luck on his side. I think he's been good on short flat tracks this year, had kind of threw one away at Richmond. So if you don't have Reddick, I would probably say maybe get a little bit of exposure to him, but it's going to be hard to point in, especially if Byron and Blaney qualify well. I think that this week qualifying is hands down the number 1 priority for these teams. It will kind of dictate the strategy for the weekend. And if Ryan Blaney goes out there and puts it in the top 3 or top 5, it's going to be really hard for guys like Truex and Hamlin to make up any ground. They're going to have to go for the win. And if that's the case, there's, you might as well take them to win the race and sprinkle a little bit for them to move on, because it's going to be win or go home if Blaney and Byron both qualify well, in my opinion.
I'm very curious to see, and I know some books pull odds to win the championship once qualifying starts and finishes, if there are proper adjustments made, or you'll be able to find a little bit of wiggle room and maybe some opportunity.
Good point.
In the season-long market once we know what that starting grid is going to be.
Yeah, I think that I would wait. If you don't have any exposure to Reddick, I think that, because I do think he can go out there and win Phoenix, and also if you don't have any Truex, it might be time to kind of nibble there. But let's just say that Truex practices well and qualifies well, and he reopens like 16 or 17 to 1. I don't think there's anything wrong with waiting.
Yeah.
If they're not going to make too much of a move, without elevating other guys, right? So even if, let's just say, Truex looks like a rocket in practice and he goes down to 10 to 1, well, that means that you're going to see a better price on Hamlin, or probably not Byron. You're probably going to see a better price on Hamlin and Blaney. So I think you probably wait, but I still think that Reddick the number one best value on the board, in my opinion, is Martin Truex Jr., because he could absolutely go out there and win at Phoenix. I do not think that Denny Hamlin can go out there and win at Phoenix. If we're making the assumption that Larson, Bell, and Byron are moving on, and there's only one spot, I think Truex is the only guy that could really, well, Blaney, shoot. Blaney could be that guy too. I think.
Final answer,
Todd,
or are you going to talk yourself in circles around here?
I'm just going to keep
the hell out of all of our listeners.
I just think that if I could make a case for everybody, I think Blaney and Truex have the best chance of winning at Phoenix. However, Truex has the best price, and he's also, I would say, a little bit better here at Martinsville. So that's why I'm going to just stick with Truex. 20 to 1 is the best number on the board.
Final answer.
Final answer.
All right.
Thank you.
We can wave the green, white checkered flag before you confuse me just as much as everybody else listening to this show. And it's a friendly reminder to all of our loyal listeners. It's why you don't drink and podcast like Chris tries to do on Wednesday nights. So without further ado, when we get to the third stage, it's all about drivers to watch this weekend. And as far as Martinsville is concerned, we may as well hit on some of the track specs first. It's a NASCAR-owned track, 0.526 miles, a paperclip shape. It's how it gets its nickname, with long straightaways and flat hairpin turns. Martinsville Speedway is the shortest track on the NASCAR Cup Series circuit. Because of its small size, tight corners, and unique shape, that's how the nickname came to pass. Asphalt to concrete surface that will challenge drivers in what you'll hear plenty of times in the conveyor belt. You get shuffled to the outside. Good luck getting to that inside line if someone is willing and able to let you in. This is also the 1-year anniversary Werme of the Hail Melon, where Ross Chastain rode the wall into the Final Four. For those folks hoping we'll see a little bit of a Cinderella and cinematic type finish, that will not be the case. As we told you the first time around at Martinsville, that kind of maneuver has been outlawed, citing driver safety. So when we look at the drivers to watch, you mentioned Denny Hamlin as the overwhelming favorite at a price right around 3 to 1. Picked a very bad time to have two finishes of 30th or worse over his last 3 races. But when we look at his track history at Martinsville, 4th here in the spring, 35 career starts in his home state of Virginia, 24 top 10 finishes, 18 top 5s, 5 checkered flags. Denny Hamlin has led more than 2,200 laps at Martinsville, finished 5th in last season's playoff race and 4th in this season's spring race. Denny Hamlin at 3 to 1. I can't imagine anyone is running to bet this guy here, because if he goes out there and has the best car in practice, qualifies on the pole, what are we taking? Plus 250 at the absolute worst?
I think he's going to go off at a higher odds than that. I mean, he would have to pull it with an absolute rocket. And by the way, I think he's going to have to be in the faster group of practice as well. So I think that this price is very protective by all the odds makers. They just don't want to take any Denny. They're just basically saying, hey, don't bet Denny. But I expect him to go off at higher than 3 to 1. He hasn't been a spectacular qualifier. When I'm looking at the last 7 races or so at Martinsville, he's 6th or 7th in average starting spot. So that's going to dictate a lot of the strategy that goes into this race, along with how aggressive that strategy will be. So I would definitely stay away from this 3-1 price on Denny. I can't see, I don't think the shortest price we've seen all year was Larson at Vegas, correct? Like a plus 250.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And
After
I just
qualifying,
can't imagine at Martinsville seeing someone go off at that short of a price. No, I don't think it's going to happen at all.
so many things can go wrong, obviously. And that's where, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, that's where the odds start to get a little bit more interesting. Kyle Larson with a price tag right around 8-1, 13th or worse in 4 out of 5 races recently, but he does have the win at Vegas, so it affords him that luxury. The only pressure this week is keeping a JGR driver out of pointing his way in potentially, namely Martin Truex Jr. When we look at track history, Kyle Larson did win here in the spring, finished second last year in the playoff race where he started from the pole. And before that, he had been a mixed bag of mediocrity. But you look at over the last 4 races at Martinsville, led 30 laps in April, led 68 laps last October, didn't lead in any in April. And the first time they came here in the next gen car with a 19th place finish. And before that led 77. Buying or selling Kyle Larson, knowing it's boom or bust for him to try and race for a victory.
Well, I don't like this 8-1 price. He doesn't typically qualify. Well, at least earlier this year, he didn't qualify well. I think he came from like 17th or 18th position. So I don't anticipate his odds dropping significantly, especially when you have Denny Hamlin kind of pinned at that 3-1 price. Now, he was really good for Kyle Larson at Martinsville in this spring race. However, he ran more of a William Byron type race where, hey, I might not be the best car, but I'm going to hang around and give myself a chance to win at the end. I do think that Denny kind of gave Larson the win on the second to last caution when Denny was leading and decided he was going to go down and take tires. And Larson, who was on 10 or 12 lap tires, decided to stay out. And that allowed him to then take 2 tires for the final stop and win the race off pit road, or at least be the first guy on tires. So it was a win for Kyle Larson, but a lot had to go right for him. He just pulled a Byron or a 2022 Chase Elliott, where they just kind of find themselves running in the top 3 or 4 with that final caution, and then do something on a final restart with maybe a slight edge, whether it's 2 tires or 4 tires versus 2 tires, or just staying out when it's really difficult to pass. So I don't love this 8-1 price on Larson. Just, I don't think he'll qualify in that top 5. I anticipate we'll see that price drift out a little.
William Byron, his teammate, also in a similar price range. When you look at the 24's current form, average playoff finish is a shade worse than 5th, but that mark actually improves to a shade worse than 4th over his last 5 races. Since the playoffs started, only 1 finish worse than 9th. Came at Kansas where he finished 15th, 4 top 4s in his last 5 races. As far as track history for William Byron at Martinsville, 23rd here in the spring, 11 career starts at the track, 6 top 10 finishes, 4 top 5s, 1 win. He won the first next-gen race at Martinsville after leading 212 laps last spring. Byron has been the most consistent playoff driver, not just during the playoff run, but all season with only 1 finish, as we said, outside of the top 10 in 8 playoff races. Are you a little bit more intrigued by William Byron at a similar price as Kyle Larson?
Absolutely. I think he's more talented of a driver on this particular track. And if we go back to before the playoffs started, let's go back to Watkins Glen and listen to his finishes. 1st, 8th, 4th, 15th at Kansas, 9th, 1st, 2nd, 2nd, 7th, 4th. If that's not consistent, I don't know what is. And he's had a chance, he's, kind of had this great season with 6 wins this year. He's only been the best car once or twice, I would say, and that was early in the season. He's just done a great job of just being there at the end. You combine that with the fact that this team is just running well. They're not making mistakes. Their pit road stops have been unbelievable this year. It's almost been the only team that's been a real weapon. I anticipate William Byron to have a really strong race. Where I get a little hesitant on slamming this bet, kind of before practice and qualifying, is we don't know where their head's at. If they go out there and qualify 15th, I think this team is going to say, you know what, let's just keep mistakes to a minimum. Let's score some stage points and let's just move on into this final race at Phoenix. So I still think so far of all the guys that we've discussed, I do like this price the most. If someone were to come to me and say, hey, I'm going to bet William Byron today to 1 at Martinsville before practice and qualifying, I'd say, you know what? That's probably not a bad bet. I anticipate them to be competitive all day. They could also go out there and do what they did last spring, which was, qualify on the front row or the first 2 rows and then lead a ton of laps and go on to win the race. I think that that's definitely an opportunity for this 24 team. This 8-1 price isn't bad at all.
I'm a little bit surprised by the next driver we'll discuss. He's on the outside looking into the playoff race, and historically he's been good at Martinsville, but recent results don't suggest that he should have a number this short. That would be Brad Keselowski, who, as far as current form is concerned, has finished 18th or worse in 3 out of his last 4 races overall, 14th average finish since the playoffs started. When we look at what he ran here back in the spring, it was a 24th place finish, 3 straight finishes at Martinsville of 17th or worse in the next gen car. 2 of those 3 races, he actually started inside the top 10. Now, he was able to achieve a driver rating of 100 plus before finishing 36 last fall. So his finishing position wasn't indicative of the kind of car he had from start to finish. But look, just 1 top 10 in his last 5 trips to a track where he used to be a lot better than he's run of late.
Yeah, the thing with Brad is if you go back and look at how competitive RFK was early in the season, you would say not as competitive as they are now. This team has made massive strides. They have 3 wins with his teammate in Chris Buescher. However, Brad seems to just find trouble week in and week out. If you pair that with a tough qualifying position where they started 21st here in the spring, they were able to work their way up through the field with an average running position of 13th. That's good, but that's not 8-1 good. And I understand that he's been running much better these last few weeks. However, you still have to, it's still so hard to win these races. I do not think that Brad K has an 8-1 type car week in and week out. I do think they're more like a 12-1 car. I think that that's where you start to see value on this 6 team. So I'm going to go ahead and wait on Brad at 8-1. I certainly think that if he has a car underneath him, 8-1 would be a really good price. But let's wait and see what happens after practice and qualifying. I doubt he goes off as the favorite. So you're really not going to give up too much value on him at this point in the week. So let's just wait and see what happens and see how they unload.
Are you willing to buy into Martin Truex in the double-digit range? As far as his current form, nothing to write home about. Playoff average finish outside the top 20. Last 5 races, not much better. And he only has 1 top 10 finish to his name since the postseason started. When we look at how he's run at Martinsville in the past, was 3rd here in the spring, 35 career starts at the paperclip, 16 top 10 finishes, 10 top 5s, 3 wins that you mentioned at the top of the show. And all 3 victories have occurred here since 2019. But when we look at Truex, he's finished 22nd and 20th and 3rd in the 3 next-gen races at Martinsville. He only has the 1 top 10 finish in this season's playoffs, 7 finishes, 17th or worse. Look, the 19 feels like a cat here that's working on maybe his 8th or 9th life at this point, but still has an opportunity to get to Phoenix and put all of these playoff struggles in the rear view mirror if he's able to accomplish that feat.
I don't mind Truex at 10-1. I think that if we see a good qualifying out of him, which we really haven't seen in this, well, remember this next gen car, he was kind of trash last year. I think all Gibbs cars on or Toyotas for that matter were definitely struggled in their short track program. Obviously turned it around last year or earlier this year with a 5th place starting spot and then a 3rd place run. So definitely some improvement. And I think this is also a key indicator is this was before he kind of hit his stride when it came to speed in the middle of the season. I mean, there was a point at the middle of the season when I'm like, man, who is going to beat Truex anywhere? We thought when we especially went to short flat tracks, you went to the Richmond 2 and Loudon, it was like, man, this guy is going to
peak too soon, Worm. He peaked too soon.
He peaked too soon. He peaked in high school and now we're in college and we're looking for a job. And right now, I think that Truex can go out there and get it done? Absolutely. This is a team that they find a way to make mistakes. And last week they were on the bad side of that pit cycle with a caution, and then they have a blown engine. I thought he was probably a 4th or 5th place car. He wasn't as fast as he was here last year, or as fast at Homestead as he was last year, but He's Martin Truex Jr. at Martinsville. I anticipate him to be really aggressive. And if he needs to win, I think that this 10-1 price, he opened at 12 and that lasted about 60 seconds before he was bet down to 10. So there's definitely some sharp action that came on him early in the week. And I think that they're probably right. I anticipate Truex to be competitive, and 10-1 is not a terrible price for someone that needs to win, most likely. We're going to take that with a grain of salt because we don't know what's going to happen to Byron and Blaney. And, a loose wheel or speeding penalty, and all of a sudden Truex is racing for points. So although I do like that 10-1 price in a must-win scenario, if there's some things that happen to other drivers ahead of him in the playoffs, they might just sit back and cruise and be happy with a third place run and move on to Phoenix.
A driver of the 12 car, apropos of his odds, also at 12-1, Ryan Blaney, the only remaining viable contender from Team Penske. When we look at Ryan Blaney, 4 straight races of finishing 12th or better, starting to round into shape when you have to do it. 3 top 6 finishes during that span, a playoff average just inside the top 12. As far as Martinsville is concerned, he finished 7th here in the spring, does have 15 career starts. 60% of those 15 starts have resulted in top 10 finishes. For those doing the quick math on their fingers, that's 9 out of 15. 7 top 5s, 377 laps led. And while Blaney has not won at Martinsville, he has the best average finish of 9.5 at the track amongst all currently active drivers. Ryan Blaney, can he get his way to Phoenix and salvage his season?
I think he can, but he might not need to. I think if you're Ryan Blaney and you qualify well, you're going to sit back and say, okay, someone beat us, or someone go ahead and score enough points or go win the race in order to knock us out of the playoffs. Like I said, I think that qualifying this week is as important as it has been of any race this season. And his price has been kind of bouncing around. I think there was like a 14 down to 12, back up to 14, back down to 12. So it'll be interesting to see. I think that last week, Blaney showed something on a high tire wear track we haven't seen before. And whether that's adding resources or maybe the 22 opening up their kind of their playbook and how they approach races. I mean, Paul Wolf is an absolute genius on that 22 pit box. So, maybe that is lending some positive vibes for this 12 team. And though I don't love that 12-1 price, man, his average finish over the last 7 races dating back to 2020 is 5.7. The only car that's has a better finish than him over those 7 races at Martinsville is his teammate in Joey Logano. So there's something that Team Penske has done quite well over these past few years that lends to being competitive at this track. So, and then if you look at just this next gen car, the average finish over the last 3 races for Joey Logano is 3.7, and then right behind him is Ryan Blaney. Penske is really strong here. I think these are great odds for someone like Ryan Blaney. However, if he qualifies well and he scores points in both stages, I think that they're going to be, let's take 4 tires. Let's just kind of keep everything in front of us and go on and move on to Phoenix, where I do think they have an excellent chance of winning at Phoenix and potentially winning the championship with a 1-win season, which would be just kind of incredible.
Blaney does have to make sure, though, he's also racing against the 11 and 19, as we think those are probably the 2 drivers most likely to win and get in. I'm not sure Blaney can bridge the gap to get to William Byron, but look, anything is possible, and that's why the guys on the pit boxes get paid the big bucks to keep tabs on all the scenarios, keeping tabs on all of that real-time data and exactly where they need to go to either pick up points or to make sure they can keep their competitors at bay. You mentioned Team Penske, and Joey Logano finds his shortest odds in quite some time at this track for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned, in that 14, 15-1 range. 3 straight races overall, no finish worse than 12. So he's quietly putting together a strong ending to the season. Yeah. When we look at his track history, he finished 2nd at Martinsville in the spring, 6th in the playoff race last year, and 2nd in the spring. All pretty good results in the next-gen car. He's raced through the field as well, since in those 3 next-gen starts, he started each one of those races outside the top 10. That being said, he's only led 25 laps in that 3-race span. 8 straight trips here, no finish worse than 10th. Joey Logano and the 22.
I like Joey. I think he opened 16. He was kind of quickly back down to 14. The one thing you have to say about this is Joey was struggling to stay on the lead lap for most of that spring race. if you don't qualify well here, you just put yourself up against you're back against the wall, because those leaders come so quickly to put you a lap down. So you all of a sudden go from, hey, we're going to go try to win the race, to all of a sudden, hey, we just need to stay on the lead lap so we can be competitive here. Because once you go a lap down and you get pinned a lap down at Martinsville, unless it turns into a caution fest, it's really hard to get that lap back, or at least end up on the lead lap with the same tires as the leaders. Because even if you stay out and you get the wave around and you have cars on fresh tires coming to chase you down, it's really easy to find yourself down another lap. So, I do like Logano. I think that there's a lot of upside for him, especially if he qualifies well. Unfortunately, in this next gen car, his average starting spot is 13.7. I can't see Logano dipping below that 14-1 price if he does qualify outside the top 10. So I'm still going to wait, but I would not hesitate to pull the trigger on him at a 10-1 price if he looks like he has a good long run car, because Paul Wolf is going to be really aggressive and try to get that team a win. And to your point earlier, when we were discussing the podcast, if Joey Logano goes out there and wins the race, he really kind of protects his teammate from guys like Tyler Reddick, Martin Truex Jr., and Denny Hamlin that, are kind of in a scenario where they know that they're automatically in if they win. So I think that all of those things kind of together lend for Joey to have a potentially good weekend. I just don't like the 14-1 price quite yet, just based on how he's qualified here in the next gen car.
It is a very F1 type scenario that Ryan Blaney can run on one strategy, Joey Logano can run on another, and it allows Team Penske to more or less cover their bases if either of those drivers is able to win it.
And Logano owes him one from last year at Phoenix, where he
ran interference to get the 22 to victory lane. Ryan Blaney's out there cruising around, pulling a no-neck Newman, making sure that nobody could get by him.
Well, nobody passed Blaney all day last year. So as soon as Logano got to the lead and Blaney just kind of worked his way back up to right behind him, it was like, Roger Penske gets on the radio and says, hey, second's a really good finish. And he says, okay. So that was a good point. If Logano can go out there and do something to help his teammate, damn well. And maybe that means just getting on a different strategy. If Blaney's leading one strategy, whether it's 2 tires or no tires, if you throw Logano in there and he's able to be the first person on a different strategy, that could be a race-winning scenario for Logano, and it could also help him punch his teammates' ticket to the playoffs or the championship.
So many interesting different scenarios that could play out there, knowing how good Logano has been at the track and what he could mean to Ryan Blaney's prospects to advance into the Final Four. 3 other drivers I want to touch on in some capacity: Tyler Reddick, Christopher Bell, and Chris Buescher, the other drivers in the playoffs. We know Chris Bell is already through. He's priced at 20-1. 5 of the last 7 races, he's finished 8th or better. Back-to-back podium finishes to punch his ticket. 16th here in the spring and 7 starts at Martinsville overall with 2 top 10 finishes. We look at Tyler Reddick, playoff average finish inside the top 10, 3 straight finishes inside the top 8. So he's really put together some good runs, just doesn't have that win on his resume. 22nd here in the spring, and when 7 career Martinsville starts, only 1 top 10 finish. Meanwhile, Chris Buescher, we talked about him needing his own version of the Hail Melon. Average finish of 11th over the last 5 races, just outside the top 13, an average playoff finish. Track history-wise, 14th here in the spring. Does have 16 career starts at Martinsville on his resume, 1 top 10 finish, and an average finish of 19.4. When you look at Bell, Buescher, or Reddick, any of those guys, before we see them unload, willing to make the Werme dance card?
Well, if we think about this Tyler Reddick price, I think that there's some even 50-1s out there for him to win the championship. Gosh, there is a way for him to point his way in. There absolutely is. I don't know how. I can't kind of imagine. Well, I can imagine. I just don't know from a racing perspective how he makes that work. He was surprisingly strong here in the spring for short, flat tracks. Now, this was before he had kind of progressed as a good short track racer, in my opinion, this year. He had a chance to win at Richmond. He gave it away with a silly mistake. I'm optimistic for him, but I still can't imagine him going out there and qualifying in the top 4 and, competing for the win. I think that his best chance at moving on is for someone to make a mistake and for him to just kind of run a flawless race. That being said, I don't like the 16-1 win price. I like him more in auxiliary stuff. Maybe it's a top 5 or top 10 price. I don't know. I think, gosh, so much is going to hinge on this qualifying, because if he qualifies 20th, he's got to win the race, in my opinion, especially if Truex, Hamlin go out there and qualify well. So at this point in the week, there's so much that can change. It's not just a straightforward race. The goal for this team is not to win this race. Obviously, that would be great, but the goal is to advance. And sometimes that means that you have to be a little bit more conservative, especially if the guys you're racing against are having issues. You can go out there and put 4 tires on, just stay super conservative and punch your ticket to Phoenix. So as much as I do think that Reddick is probably going to have to win the race at this point in the week, he doesn't have to. There's still a road for him to point his way in. So I'm going to stay away from the 16-1, but depending on how he qualifies, there could be potential for him in matchups or top 5 or top 10 prices.
Buescher, Bell.
Oh yeah, Buescher, Bell.
Look, I mean, when you look at those two guys, I mean, obviously track history doesn't suggest that we can have massive expectations. We know Bell went out there and apparently races at his best when everything is on the line. You wonder what kind of effort you'll get from him here. I'm not saying he goes out there and tanks the race, but there is no doubt a collective sigh of relief. And you have to think, if JGR is allocating limited resources, they're going to the 2 drivers on the other side of the cut line.
Well, if you look at, I have just on my notes, it's not a must-win scenario. So why would you take Chris Bell to win the race? When you look at his Cup wins, I think he won. His first win was on the Daytona road course. He was able to somehow get his first win. And then, everything else has been kind of a must-win scenario for him.
Pretty wild when you think about it that way. I mean, maybe they should just tell him in every, pre-race, hey, look, this is a must-win. You need to go out there and race your balls off.
And I don't know what it is. And I got into a conversation, I think it was during the live teardown with Bianchi and Jeff Gluck, someone saying that Byron is a better driver than Chris Bell. Well, under what circumstances? I think that William Byron's a very consistent driver, but if you need someone to figure something else out, I think that Chris Bell does a great job of that. He's one of those guys that if there's a poor handling race car, I trust Chris Bell with it much more than I trust a guy like William Byron. And he's taken a couple of poor handling race cars and has been able to get great finishes. He's getting a finish way better than his average running spot. That's what I would call a great finish. Anytime your average running position is higher than where you finish, that's just getting great finishes. And Chris Bell does that very well. 20-1's a handsome price for a guy that has nothing to lose and can go out there, and if there's a caution with 25 to go, he's running 6th and the leaders are staying out, he could be the first guy down pit road. And that's how he ended up winning the race last year. That's how he ended up winning the Roval. So I think that, and Adam Stevens has been playing chess lately. Some of the stuff that he did, where the pitting at the Roval and only giving up 2 stage points and still being able to flip the stage, I thought was phenomenal. So I think that Adam Stevens has done a phenomenal job. I think he's, been a little underrated this year just because Chris Bell doesn't have the wins that people anticipated. But 20-1's not a bad price for this guy. I like it a lot more than I like that Chris Buescher 25-1. I think this team, you better qualify well, and this is the Hail Melon. I mean, and by the way, he's going to need to win. Like the Hail Melon just needed to pick up 4 spots on the last turn. He's going to have to pick up every spot and win the race in order for this to go through. I still think it's a fantastic year for RFK Racing, especially Chris Buescher. It goes to show you that he's a guy that if you put a race-winning car underneath him, he can go out there and make it happen. It was not easy for him to win at Richmond. It certainly was not easy for him to win at Michigan. He was able to go out there and do those things. So congratulations to Chris Buescher. It's a phenomenal season, but I think that this is where his playoff run stops.
Hey, a lot of reason for that race team to be excited going into next year. You're working with a little bit of house money in this particular spot, so we'll see if they can do something truly special to get themselves to Phoenix with a chance to win the championship. You can follow Chris on X at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Wormser, we've come to a fork in the road. little best
Great.
bet portion of the program. You are extremely optimistic. You are the optimism. You are the sunshine in my eye more often than not. Where are you taking us from a pre-week position, kind sir?
All right. So I'm going to stick with Golden Boy, Chase Elliott, -110 over Kyle Busch. If you look at the last 7 races, the average finish, or at Martinsville, average finish for Kyle Busch is 14th, and Chase Elliott's is 7.9. If you couple that with even their starting position over the last 7 races, you have Chase Elliott with a 7.6 starting position, Kyle Busch with 11.6. So he's beating him kind of there. And then if you just go to the next gen era, we're looking at similar numbers. You have Chase Elliott with an average finish of 10.3, and you have Kyle Busch. Gosh, where did I lose him here? Kyle Busch was a putrid 19.3. I know he did have a little bit of
not good, Bob. Not good.
Not good at all. So we've had some struggles with this Kyle Busch, and I also think that RCR has been a tick off when it comes to their short track program. Kyle's been very vocal about that. So I anticipate more of the same. I think that I would just throw away last week. There was something, the last couple of weeks, I think that Chase has really struggled, but I think that's more that intermediate speed that they're missing out on. I think once you get to a short track, put the car more in the driver's hands, I think that you'll find Chase with a better finish than Kyle Busch.
Looking to try and add another clock to his illustrious collection there for Chase Elliott. This is the weekly reminder, fun with time zones for you. The pre-race poll this week for those folks looking for post-practice updates will take place at what fine hour on Sunday?
Geez, you're going to ask me this right now. And I was so good last week. I even put out the race weekend schedule here. I put it out early last week on Monday.
You're too busy offering life advice on Twitter that you can't figure out time zones.
Yeah, I offer one thing. I had people messaging me, hey, is everything okay with you? I just had a conversation with a buddy, and I was like, you know what? This might be a good post. So, by the way, working out is a life hack, makes everything better. But when it comes to the pre-race poll,
so is making your bed first thing in the morning.
Yeah. Well, my wife does that. So yeah, it's going to be 10 a.m. again on, what time is it? Is Virginia East Coast time?
Oh my God. Yes. Virginia is in the Eastern time zone.
All right. Just making sure. Yeah. Then it's actually going to be probably a 9:30, between 9:30 and 10 o'clock will be the pre-race poll.
And you, of course, will put that out on your timeline.
I got to do some math. I don't have a calculator handy. I'm panicking now looking at when this thing goes green, because it always says 2 o'clock, but then they go green at 2:40.
You know what the best part is that we're going to have the fall back the day before the race at Phoenix. And with that hour difference, you are going to completely paint yourself into a corner of confusion, and no one is going to know what the hell you're talking about.
Zero chance I know when the pre-race poll will be. When we record this next Wednesday and you ask me when the pre-race poll will be at Phoenix, I will have zero clue when that'll be. I have trouble when I'm
you're coming prepared. I appreciate that. Glad you're coming prepared.
Yep.
36 episodes into the season, you're buttoned up and you're in postseason form. So you're racing right now like Martin Truex, going to drive us off the side of the road. Maybe you can redeem yourself with a late race caution.
Playoff run. That's for damn sure. Hopefully we get a winner this week. We've been on the right side of a few bets.
It's been frustrating. There's no doubt. We're not here to sugarcoat it by any stretch of the imagination. It has been a tough close to the season from the torrid pace that we started early in the year, and can understand some of the listener frustrations and know we make all of these same bets. So when you guys are losing, we're right there losing with you, is the unfortunate reality of it. So it goes and hurts all the way around.
Yep. But hey, we're on to next week. And you know what? I'll just stop saying I love betting the track. I hate Martinsville. Maybe
novel concept. There we go. It's exactly what we've been looking for. So you hate Martinsville, double down on your position. All kidding aside, stay true to your money management principles. And with a Chase Elliott head-to-head matchup right around a pick'em price over Kyle Busch come Sunday afternoon, we will see you at the window.